Hey Defenders, welcome back. So in the last video we finished installing Elasticsearch, FileBeat, and Kibana and briefly loaded up our Kibana web UI to see kind of what it has to offer us. But now let's actually do a deeper dive into the Wazoo application that we installed in the previous video. But first, time for my shameless plug. If you want to learn more about our company, head on over to opensecure.co. If you would like to hire us for a project, select the Hire Us button at the top of this video. To see firsthand the power of open source technology, take advantage of our interactive demo. Select the demo button and start exploring. Now let's get back to the video. So the team over at Wazoo also develops a Kibana plugin. Kibana supports various plugins, so you'll see other open source tools. If they have a strong community behind them, will also have their own plugins. By default, these other ones are not necessarily third-party plugins. These are this management, security, observability, enterprise search, and Kibana. These all come pre-bundled with Kibana and as part of the initial Kibana install. However, if you remember in the last video, we needed to install the Wazuh App plugin, and so that's what you see here. So if we go ahead and go into this guy, and you'll see it was running, Kibana ran a health check there, and we see that it is having an issue, thinking that the API seems to be down. So we'll need to go ahead and correct that on our end. So what's happening kind of behind the scenes is the Wazoo manager also runs an API that listens for connections on 55,000. So if we go back to our diagram here, what we just tried to do by selecting the Wazoo app to load the to basically connect to Wazoo's API, that's what's funneling all the data to this guy. We are sending a request from our Kibana server to Wazoo, and this will be on, let's say, Wazoo API port 55,000. And so if I go back onto our manager, this is our Wazoo manager that we deployed a few videos back. And if we run a systemctl and list out, if you remember, the sub-processes of Wazoo that we briefly talked about a few videos back as well, that are responsible for various tasks that make up the whole Wazoo manager, we also see this Wazoo API daemon. And this is built on Python 3, as you can see, and is running here as well. If this were not running, we of course wouldn't be able to connect. If we also do a netstat to view what ports are listening on the box, we see our port 55,000 here. So what we can do is let's go ahead and configure Kibana to be able to hit this guy. And so if we look at the configuration, it looks like we need to change some settings in this wazoo.yaml. So if we get back onto our server where we stood up Kibana, we will make these changes here. So we go into this user share Kibana, optimize Wazoo config, wazoo.yaml is the complete file path and file location. You can see there's a ton of options already preset in here. Most of these, all of them, we don't have to worry about for now until we get to the very bottom. But there's various, depending on your environment or whatever health checks you want to run prior to getting into the app. You can omit those if you want. We can also make settings within the Wazoo app once we get there. But what we're curious of doing is coming down to the bottom here, and we see our hosts, and we see now this is just set to localhost. So Kibana, when it's the reason why it sees the API down is because it thinks the API is running on itself, which of course it's not. So we need to grab the IP address of our manager that's actually running the API, and it is over HTTPS. All right, so we do that, and we can leave the username and password just as default for now. You could make these your own. in an actual production environment, you would want to change that accordingly. So we'll go ahead and just save that off, and we don't need to do any other restarts of any services or anything. We can just go ahead and check connection. And so after running that check connection, we can see that it indeed did connect to our host here, and we are online and we are ready to go. So now that we have loaded into the Wazuh application, the app plugin, this is where we'll do a lot of our viewing of security logs that we're receiving from our agents, running health checks on our agents. So for example, if we go into this agents tab here, we'll see the 2 agents that we've spun up, right? If you remember in the previous videos, we also get some metadata around that as in terms of their operating system, the agent version that we're on, registration date, keep alive. And these keep alives are just how often it's polling the agent just to make sure it can still connect to it, and we see a status as active. There's 2 other statuses. You'll either get a disconnected or a never connected. Never connected meaning that the Wazuh manager has it. If you remember in our installation section or installation video, that we can manually add an agent before we can manually add an agent on the Wazuh manager before we actually install the software on the agent itself. And so if we were to do that on the manager, that's where we would see this never connected. And a disconnected means that it was active at one time and connected, but is now disconnected. So if we stopped the agent on the Wazuh agent service on, let's say, this Linux box here, this would move to a disconnected state. But if we go ahead and click on the agent, we can go into this guy and start looking at security events, file integrity changes, a wealth of information about everything going on this host. So if we go ahead and pop into security events here, we then also have a time frame, and we can see what all has happened within the last 24 hours here. So from here, let's go ahead and jump onto the configuration portion here, and this outputs to us all of our settings that are set by the Wazuh agent. And if you remember in the last few videos, we talked about the osec.conf on the agents themselves. And well, this is where all these values here are coming from. So for example, if I get on our agent and we go into var osec etc and we look at our osec.conf. So this is the configuration file that manages multiple things on the agent, right? It tells the agent what manager you're going to connect to. There's some client buffer settings that we'll go into in a few videos in the future, basically talking about how many events do I want to send to my manager per second. If this is a very busy box, say for example it's a intrusion prevention system, it's logs, it's logging all connections that are coming through it. Well, in a busy network, that is a lot of traffic, and that's a lot of logs, right? So we may want our agent to be able to queue up a size of a bigger value than just what the default is and send more events per second so that we're receiving our alerts in a real time and we're not worried about missing alerts because the queue overflows or whatever the case may be. So we'll talk about that later. Root checks as well, looking for backdoors that may be running on your agent. So it'll scan for that. There's some Woodle stuff that we'll go over in a little bit. Some system inventory. So it scans your hardware, looks at your operating system, looks at your network interfaces, and we'll see all that in a sec as well. File integrity monitoring, so we have that enabled. So when a file is either added to a machine or modified or even removed, we can get updates on that as well. And we'll see all that within the web UI, and it will be a lot prettier to see. And we can also tell the file integrity monitoring process what files or directories to ignore. So if you're outputting maybe some database logs out to a specific directory and that file is constantly changing and you don't necessarily care about it, you can exclude that here so you're not wasting resources, more specifically CPU, on your agent because it's having to keep up with that, right? So if that's a directory or even a specific file you don't care about, you can exclude that here. There's some other settings here, and then we'll go down to the local file. If you remember, this is where we tell the Wazoo agent, hey, these are the logs I want you to forward to my manager. So if we go back into our Kibana web UI, you can see some of this here. It makes these settings that you have within this osec.conf file prettier, right? So I can select communication, and we can see what encryption is being used between the agent and the manager. We can see the manager that we're currently connected to. You have some retry attempts. So all of these can be changed if you want to, depending on your environment. And then another interesting thing, the log collection. So if you want to make sure, and this will match exactly what we see here. So say for example, we have our own log file that we want to send, and we create an entry in it within the local file. So say for example, I'll just copy this guy and I'll say var osec logs, please subscribe .log, and save that and restart the agent. Then that will appear here. So this is also a good tool to verify that your agent is sending the logs that you want it to send. Another good one to dive into that I like to do just to make sure things are working correctly in my exclusions, whatever exclusions I want made are being read by the agent, is going into the integrity monitoring. We can see on general, some general settings that the file integrity monitoring, some features that we can control. So how often we want the integrity scan to run. Maybe we have a specific time of day or day of the week we want it to run. So say we have a lot of busy systems and I only want the file integrity monitoring process, because it can be CPU intensive, to only run on a Sunday when business impact is low. There aren't many users using my system at that time, and so we can then overclock. Not necessarily overclock, but we can make sure that we'll have the adequate CPU to run our file integrity monitoring, and that any extra CPU that it may take won't be detrimental to the business in terms of whatever applications are running on it. We can also, if you have NFS mounts, you can skip those. And then there's a few kind of default directories you can skip as well that are mostly related to operating system files and kernel files. And then we can also go into the monitored directories. So there's a tab here, so you see by default what's all being monitored. We can go into ignored. So say I make my exclusions here, if we scroll up a few. So say I make my exclusions here, my file directories to ignore, and I want to make sure that my directory is included when I do a restart, then that'll pop up here and will be populated here. We can also match on regex. So say if you have a log file that's being generated within multiple directories, maybe depending on your customer, maybe your customer has its own directory that's on the box, and every customer generates a log file, a .log file and you want to skip over it for whatever reason, you can do that with some regex matching here. And so that handles most of the, as the name suggests, the configuration of the Wazoo agent. And we can go ahead and jump back into this guy and let's look at some security events. So if I click on the security events tab here, we then get a time frame. I just have it set to the last 30 days. And then we're only looking at events from our agent. So that's what we see here. So if you remember, we have the other Windows agent, and then we can start to scroll. We can see security events related directly to this Wazoo agent. And these security events are triggered by our rules, and we'll get to that here in a little bit as well. But if you see, we can then get some charts here that we can quickly filter on, top 5 alerts, top 5 rule groups that are firing, and some PCI requirements as well. Wazoo also does some audit verification as well, such as like file permissions. Maybe my Etsy password file can be accessed by everyone, and that's something that the audit portion of the Wazoo agent would trigger on, and we'll see that here in a little bit as well. So then we can quickly go down and look at some of the most recent security alerts. So if you see here, we have an authentication success. So someone being me was able to SSH onto the box, right? And we see accepted password for the root user from this specific IP address. And you can go to the next page if you want as well. So we're loading in our most recent security alerts here. And as you can see, it comes in with a date and a timestamp. We can also go up to the events tab here, and this will load in all of our rules in a little more user-friendly way. We can just kind of scroll down. So we're seeing a lot of rules fire, especially related to remote login attempts, right? Because this agent is internet facing, so a lot of bots are starting to hit this guy. So say I want to look at a particular alert. Let's look at an attempt to log in using a non-existent user. So what's really powerful about Kibana and Elasticsearch is we can quickly filter on something that may be of interest to us, right? So if let's say I want to load in I only want to filter on all the rules that are an attempt to log in using a non-existent user. So that'll add the filter here at the top, as you can see, and filter only on those alerts within the last 30 days. So I can then expand this down, and let's say, okay, here we see a source user as test. So let's go ahead and toggle this column and add it to our table here. And so when we do that, you can then see that we have a new column for that. So instead of having to go down to each and every one and seeing, well, what user tried to log in and having to do the drop down here, we can toggle in and say, let's also load the city that they're coming from. So we can toggle that in as well. And you can see this Clifton city, they have some bad actors in their city. And so we can see what usernames they're coming from. We can see all the various usernames, demo. A lot of bots are just hitting this. So, all right, and so let's go ahead and make a real use case out of this, and let's see if we can generate. So let's say I'm seeing a lot of brute force attempts, right? A lot of them are failing because the user is a non-existent user. But what if all of a sudden someone got the username and the password correct, right? That's something I might want to know about. So if we go ahead and generate a authentication success alert, and we'll see how quickly this comes in real time. So I just logged in. So we should have a rule that fires here stating an authentication success. So if I go ahead and refresh this a few times, we'll then see, and sure enough, we come in, we see our authentication success, and we see the city that I'm coming from. Right? So then if we drop this down, let's look at the username. So accepted password from root, right? So we can see, let's go ahead and filter this out. And let's go ahead and say I want to make sure that I want to see all rules that fired that were generated by this root user, right? So if I go ahead and filter on this root user, I see my authentication success. Then I also see a ton of other authentication fails for the same user account. And if we go ahead and parse out the city here, we can see, so we see my successes from the city that I'm coming from, and we also see some failures. So what could be interesting to me is I see a bunch of authentication failures. I see my successes for whatever username I use to authenticate onto the box. And then I see, or number of users that are allowed to log into this box. Then all of a sudden I see a login from, let's say, root, but it's from a city where I know I didn't come from. You know, that could be a red flag of, hey, someone has access to my credentials and someone's able to log on to a server that is in fact not me, and they're logging in as me. All right, so that would be really interesting and would be a red flag as to a potential indicator of compromise. All right, so let's now take a look at another cool feature of Wazoo, and that's the integrity monitoring. Now, this integrity monitoring is the Wazoo agent analyzing our directories. If you remember what we were looking at earlier, that we have configured to monitor. And the Wazoo agent is monitoring these directories for any files that are added to that directory, any files that are modified within that directory, and any files that get deleted within that directory as well. And this can be a really powerful tool for your analysts to see, hey, all of a sudden, you know, a file was added to a box that shouldn't have been. You know, maybe that's some malware. Maybe a file was downloaded from a command and control server into a specific directory that's being monitored, and we can really gain insight into what's going on to a box and also indicate a potential indicator of compromise by a malicious file all of a sudden residing within one of your directories. So if we go into integrity monitoring, let's see, so we don't have anything within the last 5 minutes, so let's see if we can go ahead and create one. So I'll go ahead and pop into the etc directory. Let's just do a malware.sh, and I'll just say please subscribe and save that off. All right, and let's refresh a few times and see when this alert comes in. And there it goes. So after about a few seconds, so basically what happened there was the Wazoo agent stores a database internally that stores file modifications and hash values of a file, so it can determine when the file is modified, and so that's all happening on the agent side of it. So when it then detects a change, it sends an alert to the manager, who the manager then stores it and logs it here. And so we can view it within Elasticsearch. So we get a dashboard. We can see file added to the system. And if we expand that, we kind of get a top 5 users that added the file. So that's also cool, which we'll see in a sec. We get a lot of metadata around not only the file that was created, but the ownership of the file and other metadata around that. So if we then go into events, sure enough, we can see file was added to the system. We see the event specifying that it was added. So if we do this drop down, we get a lot more metadata around that as well. So these top few entries just relate to the agent itself. If we start to scroll down a little bit, we get the event. So we see that the file was added. We get the group name after the fact. So if we do a last where we get group name and ownership, we can see that here, and so that's what this is relaying to us here. Now, if this was a group of attackers, or if the username, you can see the username of who owns the file is set here. So if this was also owned by attacker 2 or something like that, there's a user that you're unfamiliar with all of a sudden grabbed a file. We will be alerted on that too. And you also get some hash values. You get a SHA-1 and a SHA-256, and you also get a timestamp. And what you could do with this hash value is, you could actually go then to VirusTotal, right? If you're curious about this, you could go into, let's say, VirusTotal and look at the hash value and see if And let's run a search, and we can upload the file hash and see if there's any matches. Of course, in our case, there isn't, because this was just a goofy example. You also get the MD5 as well. But in future videos, I'll show you guys how we can automate this API call and automate an API call out to VirusTotal with the respective hash value, and have VirusTotal process that and return that back to us under the hood, and we can automatically detect if one of our files, if a hash value of one of our files that was recently created is detected within VirusTotal as being known malware. We can also check on select the, it kind of looks like a link, and get a little more other details around it too. If there were any other agents that also had this file added to it, so say a worm got into your network and it was responsible for creating a lot of files, and we could then correlate, okay, this malware.sh is a known IOC for this worm, and I can see it's on agent 001, 002, and whatever the case may be, and I can link directly to that and get that details as well, which is really nice and really helpful to have. So we've seen it added to the file. Now let's see. So say I just modify it. I say please subscribe to Open Secure. Go ahead and save that off. And we'll refresh a few times and wait for that alert to come in, and here we go. So here we see an integrity checksum changed. So this was comparing the previous hash, if you can see. So it's comparing the previous MD5, SHA-1, and SHA-256 values, and saw that there's now a difference. And that's how the Wazoo agent under the hood knows that, hey, this file was changed, because all of a sudden now I generated a new hash for that. And so we get the details here, and then we also get the similar, group name, username after as well. So now if all of a sudden the file was owned by another user, we would see that reflected here as well. And then we also get notifications for a file being deleted. So if we were to go ahead and remove this guy, so say, and what's nice about keeping this historical artifact within Elasticsearch is, an attacker could come in, they say the worm downloads some malicious scripts, and then the last portion of that is removing, it tries to remove any evidence that it was even on the box, and so it removes the scripts that it downloaded. Well, now within Elasticsearch, even after a file is deleted, we still get that record here, right? So here we can see the event come in as file deleted, and we can see what the file was that was deleted. So we know that even though currently the file doesn't exist on the box, we now know that it was deleted and who it was deleted by, right? And so that's really nice to have as well. And let's see, so let's also do an example about someone downloading a file from a, let's say, command and control server, right? So let me just go ahead and just run a wget out to this guy, and we'll just download this file here. So say someone's has their scripts hosted on a server that they own, right? And they want to reach out from your internal network on a server that they compromise and grab their malicious scripts and pull them down onto this server that they're currently controlling. Okay, well, we would now also see that as well. So here we see the zip file being downloaded, right? And we see it being added, and then of course as it's progressing during the download, right, it's getting more data, so it's going to be modifying. You can change that as well if you don't necessarily, you just want to care about the end result, we can change that as well. But here we see that it was added to the system. So this gives us a really good visualization into what files are currently residing on my system. We can also go into the inventory and see all files that are on the file system here, right? So if I search for my malware.sh, oh, sorry, I removed it. So if I search for our, say, 20 MB, we can see that it exists here. We can see the user, the group, and as well as permissions of the file as well. So this is great in terms of, you know, letting us see what exactly is on the box without causing us to, you know, log into a box, run a ls in every directory, you know, and try to find out what's been added and what's been changed manually. You know, that's an impossible task, depending, no matter the size of your network, right? And with Wazoo, we have the ability to quickly pinpoint changes, pinpoint modifications or additions, and can easily see what may have taken place on our box at a specific time. And so that's just examples of a few of the modules, security events and the file integrity monitoring. As I've kind of hinted on, we'll get further into VirusTotal, our MITRE attack framework, vulnerability detection, configuring our own rules, kind of enhancing rules that come by default and making them fit our environment a little better, as well as some active response to where we can tell Wazoo, hey, when you see this rule fire, I want you to block all traffic from that guy. So there's a lot of possibilities on a lot of features we are going to get into. So I will see you guys in the next videos. And as always, let me know down below what you liked or disliked about this video, any errors I may have made, as well as recommendations for other open source tools you think I should explore.